I sold animated video services, focusing on, selling to some of the biggest companies on earth. We would do commercial work. We would do what they call mechanism of action videos for pharmaceutical companies, which was kind of like selling the condition while the drug was going through clinical trials. We would sell to the burgeoning startup market in the 2010s when valuations were really high and interest rates were extremely low. And I remember going to these like fully funded networking events where they would give you all this swag because VCs were like funding this whole merry-go-round. And I would do a lot of networking to try to win business. But what I would typically find was that I would go to these networking groups where there'd be a lot of real estate people and lawyers. And this was basically the analog days before the internet was what it is today. And what I would find was that a lot of people would get business, but it wasn't typically specialized agencies that did a specific thing. And that's because everything was kind of spread out and flattened across this old school, analog way of networking. And I made lots of friends and people wanted to help, but they just didn't have the connections. They didn't have the inroads to that VP of marketing or CMO in the large company or the funded startup that could afford what we did. So I ended up wasting a lot of time, kissing a lot of frogs that really didn't turn into princes, spending a lot of time like wandering around trade shows like the Javits Center for hours, and it didn't really work. So I was able to make that job work and be successful in it and win, eventually dozens of Fortune 500s and help the agency grow through digital practices. But what I typically saw was that on the analog side, when it came to like the relationship-based approach, there was one group that did really well. And that was what I called the real estate posse. They were basically people that had this ecosystem and they knew each other. And there was the title insurance broker, it was the real estate lawyer, it was the other various brokers, and they would trade leads constantly and they made tons of business. And I always remembered that. And then a lot of things changed, right? So I ended up leaving that job. I did the whole Tim Ferriss thing. I traveled Asia. I almost died on a motorbike trying to make it from Chiang Mai to Pai. If anybody listening has ever tried to do that, most dangerous thing ever. And I remember being on a laptop in the canopy of this basically backpackers hostel while everybody else was getting drunk on giant buckets of various liquor, trying to interact with clients while I built my consultancy. And eventually, I knew a lot of agency people. They all needed help getting leads. And I pivoted to becoming Sales Schema, which was a lead generation shop for agencies, marketing service companies, and basically ran that sort of business for the next 10 years, worked with eventually 200 agencies to get millions in lifetime revenue, tens of thousands of relationships in the C-suite and beyond. But the lessons from those networking days always stuck with me. And eventually from running a lot of outreach, doing a lot of like sort of cold style campaigns, we saw the market change a lot. We saw the things that used to work, we saw them stop working, right? And I think there's a lot of factors behind that. But the biggest one that you probably heard from me before is what many have called the trust recession. It's not like this happened overnight, although it kind of felt like that post-COVID. But it sort of ramped up over time, right? Because the internet is this contraption that we're slowly figuring out how to use, but it sort of the speed at which we figured it out increased by orders of magnitude around COVID. But basically what happens, as you've probably noticed, is that when you have a business that can be started with basically a laptop and internet connection, the barriers to entry are very low. So there was much more competition, both direct and indirect, for marketing services. If you had a creative shop, design shop, video, whatever it is, you are up against the perception of commoditization, as a lot of us know. And even if you have something that's more specialized, there are just more entrants in the market than ever. And there is more competition for attention than ever, as we all know. And around COVID, all the world that was analog went digital. So we saw this effect spike. So, the idea of being able to send somebody an email and break through, while not impossible, while it's something that we're doing every day for ourselves and clients, and it really can work well, it got a lot harder than it used to be because of this trust recession. So around this time, we really experienced this problem firsthand, right? Because our old playbook kind of stopped working. And we were losing clients, letting people go, got shingles, which sucks at a relatively young age. And then we had this one client that we were really getting along with well, and they were perfectly positioned, right? So they were selling branding services, but they were very well specialized on the blue chip tech companies that are based in the Bay Area. The two owners had the goal of selling the organization and cashing out within the next few years because they were at it for a while. And we tried every tactic under the sun, kind of kitchen sink sort of thing, email, LinkedIn, phone, etc., and nothing was working. And that's because we were doing the sort of playbook that assumes implicitly that the scarce ingredient that's stopping that marketing leader from saying, yes, I'll talk to you, agency owner or biz dev person, is lack of awareness. So we kept at it, and eventually, the results were coming in. We knew we'd probably lose the client, and we said, we're going to try something else. Here's what we want to do. And basically, we proposed looking at a smaller group of people that used to work for one of our clients' biggest clients, and had then gone on to another organization. So instead of any pitching, instead of really any description of what the agency did or bragging, we sent everybody a 2-line email that read something to the effect of, hey, I saw that you used to work at this company. Perhaps we crossed paths. We did a lot of work with them over this period of time. We focus on solving this problem for companies like yours. Would you be open to a call? And we got probably over a dozen meetings, 1 or 2 of which went on to significant opportunities, and then at least 1 of which closed for multi-six figures. Eventually, that agency did go on to sell, obviously not all because of us, but we contributed in a non-insignificant way. So that really kind of planted the seed in a major way, where we sort of said, hey, what if the scarce ingredient is not just more information, more selling, more awareness at the top of the funnel? And if anything, that thesis has gotten stronger as this new thing called artificial intelligence has entered the scene. It's ubiquitous. We're getting to a situation where a lot more players, if not everybody, has more perfect intelligence, and the skepticism is getting higher. The walls are going up. There's one of my favorite books. You could call it a sales book, but I think it goes deeper than your average sales book, which is Dan Pink's To Sell is Human. And he talks about how in the earlier days of a sales transaction, there was an inverse relationship between the amount of information the buyer and the seller had. So if you think about the classic car dealer in, I don't know, let's call it the 1950s, they knew everything about what it cost to sell a car. They knew how much they could stand to make. And they used that to their advantage and did a lot of tactics that we revile now because the buyer really had no advantage in the equation. And now that's flipped on its head, right? With the internet, you can go see exactly how much the car dealer stands to make, and then you could apply that to almost any offering out there. So in a situation like that, where awareness levels are so high, the scarce resource is no longer just information about a particular thing. It's really trust and knowing that the person you're hiring can deliver. And the thing that I've figured out really isn't covered enough, and the thing that kind of irritates me, is that 99% of the sales tactics that you see out there are influenced by, if not directly coming from, down market offers, and particularly the technology and software industry. When you have an offering where the value that it's promising isn't delivered until weeks, months, or sometimes even years after it's delivered, you're playing a different game. You're also playing a different game if your total addressable market is relatively small. So many of the playbooks that you see on LinkedIn or elsewhere are based on this idea of this magical buzzword called scale. It's a word that gets thrown around constantly, and it's really lost its meaning. So I want to define it, and there's a lot of definitions, obviously a fish has scales, etc. There's musical scales, but the one we're talking about is this: represent in proportional dimensions, reduce or increase in size according to a common scale. That's all that it means. So scale isn't important, although I'm probably guilty of using it in our marketing at some place. So you could call me out on that. But what I will say is that what matters is the size of your market. And what I've sort of seen, and this isn't just from me, it's from, our dozens of clients. It's from talking with almost every thought leader in the space that's been on our podcast, like Drew McClellan, Chris Dubois, Marcel Petitpas. Not putting words in their mouths. These are my takeaways from them. It's that agencies, marketing service companies need to become specialized in order to survive, in order to thrive. You can apply that to B2B services or really many consumer products and services as well at this point, including software. And if you read great thinkers like Charlie Munger, he'll make the point that there's almost this sort of scientific Darwinian element to it. And Munger makes the point, and I might be butchering this, that when we think about Darwinism, we always think about like the Gordon gecko, survival of the fittest, lion eating a gazelle type stuff, which is what it is. But another element of that is thinking about specialization in terms of like a rainforest, right? Where you have successful organisms that really serve a particular purpose and exist within a particular part of the canopy or the floor of the rainforest or whatever it might be. So there is this kind of natural order to this thing. And we know from that trying to be everything to everybody is really difficult. So I don't want to go down a huge rabbit hole or whatever the rainforest equivalent would be on specialization. But all this is to say is that chances are your market is relatively small. And if it's not, it probably should be, or at least should be heading in that direction. And if that's the case, you really have to look at like, hey, if you were to visualize your market, what sort of building would you need to house them for an event? Do you need a stadium, like a football stadium, like you would if you were selling hats or a soft drink? Or more likely, if you're in B2B and you're specialized, you're looking at a high school gymnasium. And really, you can find this out in an afternoon, if not less. When we work with clients, we're using Sales Navigator, we're honing in on the ICP, we're building an account search, iterating on it to make sure that it's accurate. And then from that, we can see, okay, there's this many companies out there that you can work with. And yes, it may iterate a little over time, but this is more or less the size of your market. In some cases, that market can be as small as a few thousand companies, if not fewer. And if you're in that situation, you really have to ask what is going to work, not just in general, but for the time and the resources that I actually have. Let's dig into that a little bit. This is another irritation I have with a lot of the sales playbooks, is that they sort of implicitly assume that you have a sales team, that you have this funded all hands on deck kind of model where you have a lot of resources to work with, a lot of time to work with. The reality is, in most agencies, it's often the owner trying to balance sales and biz dev alongside a million other things. And even in the larger agencies, the ones that are above 50 employees, there's often like one business development person that's trying to balance teeing up tomorrow's opportunities, prospecting, building the pipeline, alongside like these massive proposals, which take so much time and energy. So none of us have a lot of time. And when that's the case, there's this sort of element of like, what's going to work, but really like what's going to work based on the time that you have, right? So like there's so many things out there. I don't knock any of them. I think almost anything could work, right? You could be doing ads, content, trade shows, speaking, outbound, inbound, whatever it is. But it's really what's going to be most likely to produce opportunities consistently and reliably. So what is the answer to that? Like, what is that one golden channel? And I actually think that you should be very skeptical of anybody that just says, hey, it's this one thing, right? Like, even if you were buying something as simple and transactional as a pair of pants, you'd have to go try them on. There's not even a one-size-fits-all for pants, much less the thing that's going to get your agency to the next level. So I'd be very skeptical of anybody that says, hey, it's this one silver bullet. So what I'll do is I'll say, if you check these certain boxes, there is a very good chance the thing I'm going to talk about is that silver bullet. So I'll qualify it and couch it in those check boxes. So if your agency has gotten most of their business from referrals and personal networks, particularly of the owners and the new business people, and if you are selling up market, I don't know, and your client lifetime value is above 50,000, if your market is at least relatively small and you're relatively specialized, there is a very good chance that referrals and strategic partnerships are that thing. How do I know that? Because if you're looking back at your revenue and where it originated, chances are the lion's share of it, maybe even 80, 90% or more, is coming in that way. So if I was an alien and I came down from another planet and I was to look at that data, I would probably say, maybe we should get better at this thing that's already working as opposed to just jumping lanes all the time to the next new thing that hasn't proven itself. Sure, do some experiments, try new things when you can, but really if you want to like have a sure bet, it's getting better at the thing that already works. And if you look at, the whole like how do you get to Carnegie Hall sort of thing, right? So that's already proven out. So with that in mind, if you're with me so far, let's talk about referrals and strategic partnerships and how the usual process is broken. There's at least a few ways in which it doesn't work, right? So the first is, and the most common way, is that you're treating referrals like rain. You're sitting around waiting for them. When it does rain, you might do your little rain dance and so on, which is reactive, and there's no process or system around it, and we all know that that's not sustainable, or hopefully we do. The next level up is when you actually sometimes proactively go after referrals and try to pursue partnerships with people that can introduce you to the end clients you want to reach. This is what I did when I kind of circled back to how I started this episode with those networking days, right? Where you're going out there, you're making relationships with people. A lot of people trust you. A lot of people want to help you, but you're asking them, do you know anyone? Or maybe even better, do you know anybody who fits this criteria? And the issue is, like we've talked about, everybody's busy. And what you're doing when you ask a question like that is you're giving people a lot of homework. They have to understand what you do, which isn't always a given because we do complex stuff for weird people. At least we should be doing that. Then they have to go figure out who could be a fit based on their Rolodex. Then they have to go write that email intro that describes what you do, but also de-risks it for the person on the other side of that introduction. And all of that is a lot of work. So what happens is a lot of agencies will go after these strategic partnerships and referrals and sort of fits and starts. They might have a lot of these calls, and then they'll say nothing came of it. We exchanged these partnership agreements and NDAs for weeks, and then it just fizzled out and people just moved on. And it's like, yeah, of course that happened. It's not because they don't like you, although they might not like you, but usually what's happening is they're busy. We're busy and stuff falls by the wayside. And I find this is kind of a sidebar, but I find that sort of thing to be really interesting. It's like a lot of the times there's just very sort of human, boring psychological reasons that stuff doesn't work. Where if you just shifted it a little bit differently, if you just reframed the process slightly, you could have drastically different returns. It reminds me of Rory Sutherland and a lot of his work, where he talks about these little psychological changes in marketing can have huge outsized effects. And I'm sort of paraphrasing this, but he talks about a direct mail experiment they ran where they put animals on the envelope versus not having animals. And then they got, a huge return on people donating to whatever cause they were supporting at that time. But what's funny is that in B2B, we like to pretend we are these rational robots. And if only we could lay out this sort of legal thesis for people helping us or doing business or getting into a partnership, that it would work. And really, it's these little kind of just friction reducing psychological shifts that can make the process work a lot better. So back to what I was talking about earlier, how do you make referrals more sustainable? How do you make everything more repeatable? It's really very simple, and it's really two things. It's first making the process as easy as possible on the person that is referring you. And second, it's being consistent with it, just like anything else. So what's the starting place? And the starting place is actually with Winnie the Pooh, who has a quote that's, if you don't know where you're going, you'll never get there. So what does that mean for us? It means back to what I was talking about earlier with the TAM, looking at the specific companies and people that you want to meet. To be frank, at this point, there's no excuse for not doing this. There's more data than ever. It's cheaper than ever. The best place, what we like, is using Sales Navigator because you're going to the source as opposed to through an intermediary. But whatever it is, you can literally see every person and every company that you want to meet with just a few clicks. And if that exercise seems really hard for you, there's a really good chance that that's the thing you need to work on most. And if it's easy for you, you're a step ahead of the game. From there, the next step is identifying everybody that you know and that you would be asking for help from. In our experience, this ends up being about 2 to 10% of your LinkedIn connections. And by the way, your LinkedIn connections are just a means to an end. It's just a way for you to see the people that you might know. In our parlance, we call these the referral-ready connectors. And our clients, when they go through this exercise, will have anywhere from maybe around 100 of these people up to 500 or so of them. When you actually do this and you're using a tool like Sales Navigator, once you start putting faces and names in front of you, and what I typically find is that there's a lot of people that I've forgotten about, a lot of people that I would help and who would help me that are connected to our ICP that just kind of fall by the wayside over the course of time. So really kind of figuring out your tribe and where it lives. Back to what I was talking about at the beginning with that real estate posse. All you're doing is, instead of doing that in a finite kind of closed analog space like a networking room, you're doing that in the course of digital. You're doing that in a digital environment, which allows you to expand it and to relatively scale it. Back to that annoying buzzword. The next step is you're essentially mapping those people that you've identified as referral-ready connectors against the lead search that you've built so that you can rank them and you can say, okay, this person is connected to 20 people that I might like to meet. And this other person's connected to 5. This person's connected to 10. So probabilistically, the chances of this person who I've already pre-selected being able to help me are very high. So what's so cool about this is it's like building a very sophisticated metal detector. It's like building a very sophisticated metal detector where you know where the opportunity is likely to live before you start going down this trail of having networking calls and trying to build partnerships in a meandering way. So from there, basically at this point, you have this ranked set of connectors that are connected to the people that you want to meet. And they're already pre-selected. So then really it's about reconnecting with them in the right way. And when we're teaching this to clients, we have templates that we like to use, and there is, a bit of a situation by situation effect to it. But in general, it's about being direct. It's about being honest. It's about being helpful to them as well. And if you're with me so far, you might be wondering, where does this fit into my life? How do I sort of think about what the potential upside is with this? I think the way to think about this is it's a much better, more leveraged version of what salespeople used to do, right? When you think of the dialing for dollars, hey, I've got my list of numbers I'm going to call. I'm going to go smile and try to get some meetings booked from them. This is a much better way to do that has a much bigger potential upside, right? Because you're getting into these circles and these areas where you have this sort of trust dynamic where you're going to be more likely to get 1, 2, 3 intros a week or more to the higher level person that has the potential to get your agency to the next level. You can also be layering this with direct outreach as well, which is another thing we're working on. So it doesn't have to be one or the other, but the idea is if you have the more automated approach going, this thing can exist in perfect parallel with it and doesn't have to talk to the other side of the fence too much. So just to clarify this a little bit, one question that we've gotten for people, either clients or others that we've talked about running this for, is what makes this different than my normal networking, than the things that I'm doing every single week or that I've tried to do in the past? It's at least a few things. I think, again, the first is that you're starting with real relationships. And one thing that doesn't get talked about enough is that relationships are complicated. There's a lot of tools out there that will try to cross-reference LinkedIn connections and look at who's friends of who based on publicly available data. But the sort of thing that's pretty much impossible and may forever be impossible to figure out is the nature of your actual relationship with another person, right? So if you look at your LinkedIn connections, there are people that you don't know. That's most of them. There are people that you do know but wouldn't ask for a referral from. And then there's a certain sweet spot of people that you do know and would ask for help from. And if you start with this sweet spot that only you know from going through the right order of operations and batching up that exercise of pre-selecting them, if you start with them, then you get momentum. So the thing that makes this different is being able to get that momentum by starting with the right people. The next thing that makes this different is mapping that against the actual opportunity and the actual end prospects you want to meet so that you know where the gold is likely to live before you even begin. And that saves a lot of time and helps you move a lot faster. And then the third thing that makes this different, which is back to what I was talking about earlier, is reducing that friction as much as possible, making it as easy on the other person so that they don't have to come up with intros. They don't have to go do that homework of deciding, oh, who's going to be a fit for my friend over here? I've got to go understand all these things. I've got to go write emails. What that means is being able to actually come with specific intros in mind. Hey, I saw you might know these people. Would you feel comfortable introducing me? And by the way, here's an email intro template that you can use to make it as easy as possible. So none of this stuff is a silver bullet. Everything requires some time and effort, but this is along the lines of what we find most of our clients doing anyway on a week-by-week basis. It's just doing it more systematically. And if you can budget just a couple hours a week to this exercise, it can be a real game changer. So just to summarize, if all or most of your business comes from unpredictable referrals, if you are busy and your prospecting or sales activity is inconsistent, and maybe if you haven't gotten results from either lead gen companies or doing various tactics like cold outbound ads, whatever it may be, This could be a sign to get back to your circle of influence, to start focusing on trust, and to really double down on referrals and the strategic partnerships that bloom from them. And with that in mind, we've built something to help you, and we call it the referral engine. The outcomes we're going for are, first, installing a reliable biz dev system. Second, helping you drive high value opportunities by actually getting intros and using trust to get to these areas that can help you get your agency to the next level. And then the third benefit we're going for is helping you keep the pipeline full without the heavy lift. Once this is up and running, the goal is to spend no more than a handful of hours a week on it. First, what it's not. It's not a course. It's not a partner list. We don't have like golden eggs that we're going to introduce you to. It's not another lead gen tactic. It's not cold outreach. And it's certainly not mass automation or spam to your network. What it is first and foremost a done alongside you system. It combines custom data build out with training and accountability. So basically, we're mapping your market using Sales Navigator. We're figuring out where we're going, and we're guiding you through the process of building out this data. Second, it's getting more intros from people that you actually know, not doing any cold outreach. And then third, it's tasteful one-to-one messaging. We're giving you templates. We're helping keep you accountable through sprint sessions, and we have follow-on support through Slack and other communication channels. You're in control the whole time. You're never spamming your audience, but you're doing things that, while not automated, are systematized and leveraged. So with the referral engine, one big question you might have is, what happens if my network isn't strong enough? Like, what happens if I don't have the connections right now into the places that I want to meet? Which is a really good question, and we want to make sure that that's not an issue before we begin. So we start everything with a low-risk referral network diagnostic. Without getting too far into the weeds, basically we're looking at a version of your market and looking at a sample of your connectors to figure out if this is going to work. At the end of that session, you're going to have a lot of insight. You're going to know what the strength of your network is, and you're going to know where you should focus your energy, whether that's with a system like I just talked about, which we would recommend if it's a fit, you could decide at that point, or it might be building up more relationships with potential partners. The other thing you might be wondering is, like, what kind of tools do I need to actually implement this? And the only thing that we need is LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Other than that, the tech stack is simple. This lives with spreadsheets and your normal one-to-one email / LinkedIn messaging. Overall, the goal of this is to kind of go from referrals and partnerships being like rain to helping you install an irrigation system. So we're going from reactive to a repeatable system. We're going from high friction process that makes it hard on people to help you to a low friction process. And we're going from inconsistent, where you're doing this when you have time or when you have a happy client or it happens randomly, to consistent. That basically happens again through custom data so that you know where you're going, training so that you have a process, and accountability so that you actually implement it and be consistent.